This morning during our worship, which now takes place across Zoom most Sunday mornings, with as many people as can access it, but also acknowledging that many people cannot access it. Someone commented that this lockdown time is a bit like going into a new country. This person has spent some time in Afghanistan, and she described it as going to a new country and realising that some things were not the same as had been in England, obviously. And some things were better than what she had experienced in England. And as time went by in this new country in Afghanistan, she realised that she settled into the ways of the new country to the extent that actually she began to realise that some of the things she thought had been really good about England were really not necessarily so good. And some of the things that had troubled her about going to Afghanistan in the first place were not really things to be fearful of or to be worried about anymore. She had got used to being in the new country. And it reminded me of something that I had heard earlier this week as well, about the journey of the Magi, that familiar Christmas story where the wise men come with their retinue of camels and all their gifts to visit the new baby. Well, whether he was a baby or a 2-year-old by then, who knows? But they come to visit him, this new Jesus, the King of Kings, wonderful Counselor, mighty God. And they come to give their gifts to him. But if you know the story, they meet Herod the king along the way. And Herod is very jealous because they call Jesus the new king. Herod doesn't like this. He wants to be the only king. And so he tries to trick the wise men. He tries to say to them, "Oh, yes, please, go ahead and find where he is. Offer your treasures and worship him. But please make sure you come back and tell me where he is, that I may also go and worship him." Well, luckily for Jesus and for God's plan, the wise men, we're told in Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 2, leave for their own country by another road. They don't go back the old way. They don't go back the way they have come. Wasn't quite so lucky for all the boys who were under the age of 2, who then Herod decided to massacre. But I want to focus on those words of Matthew's Gospel. The wise men returned to their own country, but along a different road. Another wise man, T.S. Eliot, wrote a wonderful poem called The Journey of the Magi. It's a poem about birth and death. And I'm just going to read the last little bit of it because it chimes with what Matthew also speaks about. "All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again, but set down, this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation." In fact, the whole of the Bible is a story of people who move from place to place, country to country. It's a story of people who are taken into exile and captive But then when they come out, they find themselves in a wholly different place. They find themselves in the wilderness to start with, before they reach the place that God is wanting them to come to. But even then, they move on and around and to different places. Even Mary and Joseph have to leave the town that they were in to go to Bethlehem for the birth of that child. And then when they are about to come back, Joseph is warned in a dream not to go back, but instead to go to Egypt, to flee back to the place where his fellow people had been captive. And so he takes Mary and Jesus, and he goes for an unspecified amount of time. He doesn't know how long he's got to go. He doesn't know how long they as a family are going to have to be in this alien country, in a different place, in a different setup. But he goes. Finally, he is given the message by an angel that he is to return to Israel because Herod is now dead. But Joseph is still frightened when he returns, knowing that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father. And so there's still a risk. And so instead of heading for Judea, Joseph decides to head for Nazareth, taking Mary and Jesus and going and setting up home in a foreign land, in a foreign space, on the shores of Galilee, to fulfill the prophets and their message that the Messiah would be a Nazarene. The disciples are wanderers. They go to different places, different countries, you could say, with Jesus in his ministry. They even cross into foreign land, into the region of Tyre and Sidon. They cross back and forth across boundaries. And after the resurrection, they go into very different countries, very different places. And nothing is standing still now. The whole of the rest of the New Testament after the Gospels is about how the disciples, from those who have been faithful and journeyed with Jesus during his ministry to those who are new, like Paul, come to faith and come to understand the work of God in Jesus Christ, the love of God in Jesus Christ. And yet none of them are still. They travel to different places and different countries. Paul, of course, being absolutely prolific in that, setting up churches all over Asia and the Middle East, coming as far west as Malta. We today are having to inhabit a new country, new ways of being that are very alien to us. But as we settle into perhaps the way of life in lockdown and begin to think about what comes next, we find ourselves in the same situation as all those people in the Bible. We don't have a time frame. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. What we do know is that we cannot go back to our old kingdoms, if you like, in the same way. As T.S. Eliot beautifully wrote it, we return to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation. So much has changed, so much awfulness, so much tragedy, so much death, so many missed opportunities, you could say. And yet, there are always reasons for hope. Reasons to look and find the light in all of that. What we need to do now, both as church and as individuals and families, is to think about what that road back to the country might look like now. Church will come back. Life will come back to some kind of normality, but it won't be to the old dispensations, and we may not be at ease for a long time. I would hardly describe us as being at ease now, but a little bit like that lady this morning, we can see perhaps that not everything from our lives previous to lockdown were brilliant and good. Not everything that we were fearful of has been apparent in these times. There has been much to be fearful of, and much of it has become apparent. So as we think about the future, what we need perhaps to do now is take a long time to reflect individually, and starting to do that together, about what can we leave behind? What actually now doesn't seem so brilliant, doesn't seem so important? And what do we need to carry into the future? What are the important things that we have learned about being church, about being family, about being community, and about our individual lives, that we can hold on to in these coming months? It is likely that there will be some form of social distancing for a long time to come. And so things are not going to go back to normal. The things that we had hoped for, perhaps even 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, we can suddenly see are not available for us. But there will be different things available for us. New places to settle, new things to learn, new ways to inhabit. Just as the wise men went back to their own country but were completely changed, just as Joseph and Mary and Jesus go back to their own country but have to settle in a different place, so do we go back, or start the journey towards going back. Possibly in the next week we will see what comes, but always trusting that God goes with us, that he walks the journey, and always listening for his voice. We speak a lot in the church about kingdom values, about the way in which Jesus came and turned the world upside down. The kingdom values are about valuing those who are at the bottom of our society, lifting up the lowly, as Mary described it, as Jesus said it on the Sermon on the Mount, feeding those who are hungry, spiritually and physically, giving a voice to the voiceless, comforting those who mourn. That is the kingdom of God, and maybe we can see that the lowly are being lifted up. Those whom we thought a few short weeks ago were not worth paying well, were not wanted here, are now the heroes on the front of our right-wing press. How incredibly changed our times are. If this is to be anything but a complete tragedy, we need to take the opportunity now to look at what and how we can be in the future, so that the kingdom values remain, so that love and hope and life and transformation are our key watchwords in everything we do in our lives. Amen.